On the eve of the wedding, I discovered that the names printed on the wedding invitation were actually Ethan and his female assistants. I confronted the female assistant, and she tearfully said she had accidentally typed her own name instead of the bride's. Ethan then called, "Clara, she just made a mistake with a name. Do you have to make such a big deal out of it?" He scolded me for being narrow-minded and jealous, unable to tolerate even a small female employee. 5 minutes later, the female assistant posted on Facebook again, this time adding a close photo of her and Ethan to the invitation. The caption read, "The boss said that even if the sky were to fall, he would have her back." If a female employee had provoked me in the past, I would have definitely forced Ethan to fire her. But this time I really don't care anymore. I threw the invitation with Vivian's name on it into the trash, then went to the usual hair salon. The hairdresser held the scissors hesitantly, repeatedly asking if I was sure I wanted to cut my hair short. I had kept this long hair for a full 4 years until it reached my waist, all because Ethan once said that when my hair reached my waist, he would marry me. Now that my hair has reached my waist, he has indeed promised to marry me. But I no longer want to think about this hair. Including Ethan, I don't want him anymore either. I was just about to nod when my phone rang. It was a video call from Ethan. As soon as I answered, his voice came through, "Where are you?" I didn't say anything. He saw from the video that the barber was holding a pair of scissors, and with furrowed brows and displeasure, he said, "You went to get a haircut?" I nodded. Ethan suddenly burst out laughing, as if he had found something hilarious. "You look awful with short hair. You finally grew it out, so why are you messing around again?" A few years ago, when I had short hair, he always mocked me for lacking femininity. Every time, I would argue with him endlessly, proving that femininity shouldn't be defined solely by hair length. But now, I didn't say a word in protest. I just nodded and said to the barber behind me, "Go ahead and cut." Ethan saw the scissors the barber raised and knew I was serious, the smile at the corner of his mouth fading away. "Clara, just because Vivian got the name wrong on the wedding invitation, you're going to cut your hair out of spite? What's wrong with your head?" Ethan saw I didn't respond and realized his tone had been too harsh. He softened his voice, holding back his emotions, and said kindly, "Clara, you've kept this long hair for years just for the wedding day. Our wedding is next month, please don't cut it, okay?" I neither agreed nor disagreed. Then I heard Ethan say, "I'll come pick you up." I booked a really good restaurant, a new one. Ethan was always like this. Every time he lost his temper with me, he would take me to a newly opened restaurant afterward. Over the years, this seems to have become an unspoken agreement between us. He appeared outside the barber shop quickly, and when he saw that my hair was still long, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. As soon as I got in the car, I sneezed from the strong scent of perfume. I'm sensitive to smells and never wear perfume. Ethan never sprays perfume in his car either. This scent was very distinctive, carrying a predatory, passionate aroma. "Who was sitting in the passenger seat today?" Ethan's smile immediately faded. "Vivian's car broke down, so I gave her a ride for a while." I rubbed my nose. Her perfume smells quite nice." We were silent all the way, and when the car stopped at the restaurant entrance, Ethan showed no intention of getting out. He turned his head to look at me, his brows furrowed together. "Why didn't you scold her this time? Aren't you supposed to hate her?" I raised an eyebrow. According to my usual approach, I should have confronted her, then scolded her until she cried, and had Ethan fire her. But this time I didn't want to do that, and there was no need to. "Let's go in and eat. After eating, go back and rest early. I'm tired today." I got out of the car and walked into the restaurant, with Ethan following behind. After sitting down, Ethan's lips curled into a smile again. He mysteriously said he had a surprise for me, then got up and walked away. Watching his back, I suddenly thought he was very childish. Just as he walked away, the phone on the table rang. It was Vivian calling. She called twice, but Ethan still hadn't returned. The third time the phone rang, I answered. As soon as I picked up, I heard Vivian crying and shouting, "Ethan, please come save me, I'm trapped in the basement." When Ethan came back holding a flower cake, he happened to see this scene, and the joyful expression on his face instantly froze. He hurried over, casually threw the cake in front of me, and the perfect flower design immediately fell apart, with a rose covered in cream rolling off and dropping to the floor. Ethan snatched the phone, glanced at the screen, and his anger deepened. "Clara, who told you to answer my call so casually? Don't forget, we're not married yet, you're not my wife." Ethan finished the call, his face grave. "Vivian is in trouble, I have to go over there. I'll be back soon, wait for me here." With that, he hurriedly left. I stared at the deformed cake in front of me, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. With such a clumsy trick from Vivian, couldn't he see through it? Wouldn't someone trapped in a basement call for help? It's really something, someone waiting for rescue keeps calling the boss instead. I waited until the restaurant was about to close, but Ethan still hadn't returned. Fortunately, I had already asked the waiter to serve the reserved dishes first, or else I would have been waiting hungry. Just as I was about to get up and leave, Ethan rushed back in a hurry. He glanced at the leftover food on the table, then asked in a displeased tone, "Clara, why didn't you wait for me and started eating on your own?" After being in love for 10 years, this is the first time I haven't waited for Ethan to eat. Before, I never ordered food if he wasn't there, and after we moved in together, I would cook and wait for him to sit down before I touched my chopsticks. I said the apology with not a hint of remorse in my tone. "Sorry, I thought you went to Vivian's and wouldn't be coming back, so I ate first." Ethan's face darkened even more, and he slammed down what he was holding on the table with a loud bang. "I went to get the newly designed invitation sample." I looked down and saw that the cover of the invitation had indeed been changed. Ethan kept staring at me, his eyes filled with a bit of expectation and pride. He was waiting for me to open the invitation. I knew he must have checked it, and this time the bride's name would definitely be mine. But I had no interest in opening it anymore. "Aren't you going to open it and take a look?" Ethan asked in disbelief. I shook my head, my expression cold. Just as I finished dinner, I saw that Vivian had posted another update on Facebook. The photo was of the newly changed invitation card, with the groom's name as Ethan, but the bride's name was deliberately censored, only vaguely showing a V, with the rest blurred and repeated. The caption read, "I really like the new version, do you?" I urged Ethan to leave. The restaurant had already closed, and we were the only two left inside. But he stubbornly stood there, picking up the invitation and holding it out in front of me. He was waiting for me to open it, and then to coax him. I didn't want to look, so I raised my hand to block it. Ethan thought I was going to take it, so when I let go, the invitation fell onto the cake and got it dirty. He was stunned for a few seconds, then, embarrassed and angry, he punched the cake. "Clara, how long are you going to make a fuss over such a small thing? I've already given you a way out, what more do you want?" "I just want to go back and rest early." My calm tone made Ethan even angrier. "If you've seen the invitation, we can go back. Why don't you look at it? This is something I specially picked for you from tens of thousands of covers. How can you not even glance at it? Clara, is it because I have been too good to you that you are so immature? They all say that you no longer deserve me now, but I ignored their advice and insisted on marrying you. What else are you dissatisfied with?" I lowered my head and smiled bitterly, hearing the same words again. Every time we have a conflict, he uses this reason to force me to compromise. He and the people around him think that since he can marry me, I should be grateful and always put him first. But this time I don't want to compromise anymore. If you don't want to marry me, then forget it. After speaking, I didn't look at him again and got up to leave straight away. If it had been before, he would have let me go, then run off to enjoy himself with those friends, not coming home all night. It wasn't until I begged him humbly that he would come home. But this time I had only taken 2 steps outside when someone grabbed my arm. Ethan not only caught up with me but also held me back, saying he wanted to go home with me. I stared into his beautiful eyes and said, "Who said I was going home?" Ethan immediately frowned and shook off my arm. "Didn't you say you wanted to go back early to rest?" It's so late, if you're not going home, where else could you be going? His repeated questioning made me laugh out loud in disbelief. In this city, I truly had nowhere to go. After being in love for 10 years, I had always been revolving around Ethan alone. I sighed and took out my phone, opened a travel mystery box, flying out tonight. As I walked out of the restaurant, the car I called just arrived at the door. Without bringing any luggage, just a phone each, this is how I started a solo trip. It was the first time in 10 years. As soon as I landed and opened my phone, dozens of messages came in. Only one was from Ethan, with a brief sentence, "Are you satisfied this time?" The rest of the dozens of messages were Vivian's apologies. In the last voice message, she pleaded with a sob in her voice, "Clara, I really know I was wrong. Ethan said if you don't forgive me, he'll have to fire me. I can't lose this job, you know my family situation. Clara, do you really want to heartlessly watch me get fired, then my mother be kicked out of the hospital because she can't afford treatment, and my brother drop out of school because we can't pay for it?" I looked up at the sky, so different from the city where I was, and simply turned off my phone, blocking out all troubles. No matter how big our conflicts were before, I had never lost contact. Ethan could ignore my calls and not reply to my messages. But I always answered his calls immediately and replied to his messages instantly. This was the first time I didn't respond to his message, knowing full well he would be angry, yet I still turned off my phone. I wandered outside for a week. After leaving Ethan, I realized how free the wind outside really was. Every place I went, I would post on Facebook. Ethan would always like the posts but never comment. A week later, I finished my trip. After getting off the plane, I saw Ethan waiting to pick me up, holding a large bouquet of fresh flowers, standing out conspicuously in the crowd. We were silent all the way home, and when we arrived, I found that the room had changed drastically, decorated very festively. The coffee table in the living room was covered with wedding invitations, but this time they were no longer the finely printed kind, they were hand-painted. Ethan has some artistic skills and even won awards for his work during his school days. He looked at me as if expecting praise, waiting for me to compliment him. I pretended not to notice his gaze, went back to the room, packed all my personal belongings in one place, thinking I would find the right moment later to make things clear. I had just lain down to rest when I heard the sound of the keypad lock being unlocked outside the door, followed by a clear voice coming in, "Ethan, I forgot to take my blindfold." With that, Vivian stepped lightly into my bedroom, heading towards the bedside. Our eyes met, and Vivian looked away from mine. At the bedroom door stood Ethan, wrapped in a towel, his hair still dripping wet. Ethan eventually let Vivian leave first, and she didn't even bother to take her blindfold. He stood in front of me, his mouth opening and closing, before stammering an explanation. "I'd been busy setting up the wedding room these past few days, so I gave her the door code for convenience. I haven't been home these days and didn't know she was staying here. But she was really just helping out, there's nothing between us. Please don't overthink it." I looked at him calmly. "I didn't think much of it, you overthought it." "Really?" Ethan seemed incredulous and asked several times. Only when he was sure I truly believed what he said did he finally breathe a sigh of relief. I was about to take this opportunity to make things clear when the doorbell rang. Ethan pulled me up and led me to the living room, telling me to close my eyes because he had a big surprise. I couldn't resist him and closed my eyes, and only then did he go to open the door. I heard people coming in one after another, along with the sound of things being placed down. It wasn't until Ethan stood beside me and told me to open my eyes that I understood the big surprise he had mentioned. In front of me were displayed more than a dozen sets of jewelry, clearly very valuable. When I saw a familiar figure, I became even more certain of the worth of this collection. "Clara, Ethan has really gone to great lengths for your wedding, forcing me to bring all the treasures from the store for you to choose from," said Ethan's lifelong friend, who runs a jewelry shop. I didn't expect Ethan to make such a big fuss this time. If I had known a few days in advance, I would have told him it wasn't necessary. Ethan was a bit surprised to see my lack of enthusiasm. He took my hand and helped me try on each piece. When we got to the fourth piece of jewelry, Ethan's eyes lit up. this set looks great. It really suits my Clara's temperament. A light laugh came from the friend beside us. You really do like ruby necklaces. Last time Vivian tried on a ruby, you had the same amazed expression. As soon as the words were spoken, the air was filled with awkwardness. I took off the necklace around my neck and carefully placed it back on the tray. Ethan, I need to talk to you alone. I turned and went back to the room. Ethan followed behind me, anxiously explaining, Clara, listen to me. Last time, it was Vivian who said she wanted jewelry and asked me to recommend a store, so I told her about one. It just so happened that the day she went, I was there too, so we ran into each other. I nodded, signaling that he didn't need to explain any further. The more I said this, the more eager he became to explain. I suddenly remembered that a month ago, I went to a high-end mall to pick out a birthday gift for him. It just so happened that Ethan and Vivian were also at that mall. Vivian personally picked out a tie and tied it on Ethan. My untimely appearance instantly froze the joyful expressions on their faces. I stepped forward and snatched the tie, throwing it on to Vivian, telling her that choosing a tie was something a girlfriend could handle, and there was no need for an assistant to get involved. I still vividly remember Ethan's expression at that moment, cold and dangerous. Clara, I am the president of a respectable company, there's no need for you, my girlfriend, to meddle in everything, right? Ethan was very angry that time. I wanted to explain, but he ignored me for many days. It happened just as my mother suddenly fell seriously ill, and the hospital in my hometown couldn't treat her, so she had to be transferred to a big hospital. But getting a spot in the big hospital was extremely difficult, so I had to beg Ethan. Yet he didn't answer my calls or reply to my messages. Later, I had no choice but to take my mom to a large hospital to get a number for the queue. Fortunately, the security guard saw how serious my mom's condition was and quietly urged me to beg the specialist doctor for an extra appointment. But in the end, the best treatment time was missed, and my mom left me forever at the end of that year. Before she passed, my mom told me not to blame Ethan. Thinking of this, I withdrew my thoughts. I didn't say anything, but Ethan got anxious. I've already been trying to comfort you like this, what more do you want? There are guests at home, is this how you want to act? Have you considered my feelings at all? In the end, he kicked the bedroom door in anger and shouted at me in frustration, you're really hard to please. If you don't want to get married, then don't. Ethan used to threaten to break up with me at the drop of a hat, and after we got engaged, he threatened not to marry me. He always used these tactics to force me to compromise and admit fault, even when it wasn't my fault. But this time I really don't want to go through with this marriage. I looked at him coldly, then we won't get married. Ethan stared at me in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe his own ears. Clara, have you thought this through? Yes. He still couldn't believe it and asked, are you sure you don't want to marry me? Yes. My impatient tone drove him completely mad. The veins on Ethan's forehead bulged as he angrily pointed at me. Clara, weren't you the one who always wanted to marry me? You even said marrying me was your mother's last wish. What game are you playing now? You're really getting older and more scheming. How did I never realize you were so calculating before? It wasn't until he saw me leaving with my things that he realized I wasn't just saying it. But my mother's last wish was for me to be happy, not to marry him. Clara, we've been planning the wedding for so long, and now you say it's off just like that? How am I supposed to explain this to my family and everyone else? I replied dismissively, you can just marry Vivian instead. Her name is already printed on the wedding invitations, so why not just send out those invitations? After saying that, I left without looking back. The first thing I did after leaving was to return to my hometown and inform my relatives and friends that the wedding was cancelled. They all thought I had been dumped, but when I told them I was the one who called off the engagement, they all thought I was crazy. In their eyes, Ethan was the kind of high-quality man you couldn't find even if you searched the world with a lantern. Wealthy, handsome, polite, and loyal to me. But only I knew his true side. He has money, but he is not generous to me. In fact, he is even less generous to me than he is to his employees. The money he gives usually goes to household expenses. He does give me expensive gifts, but I rely on the illustrations I draw for others to cover my other expenses. He is good-looking, but that also attracts more women who fancy him. He is polite, but only to outsiders. He has never been a polite or reasonable person with me. As for being faithful, how should I put it? Over the years, he has indeed had only me as his girlfriend, and he admits to only one. But there have been quite a few casual flings, for which I have shed too many tears. This relationship, held together by my efforts alone, has somehow lasted all these years. The person I understand the least is my father. He lost his temper with me, saying I don't know how to cherish what I have. He said it was my mother's dying wish, and that it was clearly about to be fulfilled, yet I was ungrateful. I felt sad. My own father didn't even ask for the reasons and just scolded me for being ungrateful. He said that if my mother knew in the afterlife, she would definitely scold me. I told him the whole story. Unexpectedly, he got even angrier after hearing it. Which man hasn't made some mistakes in his life? Ethan is such an outstanding man, making a small mistake is only natural. As long as the person he marries in the end is you, you should be grateful. You've already set the wedding date and informed all the relatives and friends. Now you say you won't get married anymore? How am I supposed to save face? Clara, I'm telling you, while Ethan still has a shred of feeling for you, you better go back and beg him. Your wedding must go on. If he refuses to forgive you, then you don't have to call me your dad anymore. I had just returned home when my dad wanted to send me back. He wouldn't listen to my explanations at all. I dragged my unopened suitcase and left home. But instead of going back to find Ethan, I blocked all his contact information. I rented a Mountain View guest house and settled down, deciding to take a break before finding a new job. I used to be a lawyer, but after being with Ethan, I quit my job. It was just because Ethan once said, "I don't like you working, I can support you." Looking back now, I was really foolish then, loving him so much that I completely lost myself. I sent my resume to major law firms, and shortly after, someone contacted me. After an online interview, they appreciated me a lot and scheduled me to start work a week later. Before starting the job, I was retrieving things I had forgotten while watching the mountains, the clouds, and the scenery. This feeling was really wonderful. No need to carefully prepare 3 meals a day for him, no need to constantly monitor his health, no need to consider every little thing for him in advance, and no need to live by watching his mood. I never knew that after leaving Ethan, I could live so comfortably. I used to think he was my whole world, that I simply couldn't live without him. Ethan probably thought the same way. He believed I would never leave him, which is why he hurt me so recklessly. Just thinking about it makes me laugh. What kind of life was I living before? I truly feel sorrow for the person I was in the past 10 years. Although I was the one who blocked him, given his personality, with how ugly this quarrel has become, he should have blocked me a long time ago. Cutting all ties forever is better this way. Soon, I started my new job at the new company. My boss is named Sam. He's quite an elite person. He assigned me to work under the most demanding director. I was as busy as a spinning top every day. Within half a month, I completely adapted to the work pace. Only then did Sam suggest a company dinner to welcome me aboard. But I never expected that I would run into Ethan in this new city. I thought I would never cross paths with him again in this lifetime. Halfway through the company dinner, I was already too drunk, so I quickly made an excuse to go to the restroom and get some fresh air. Maybe because I haven't drunk in years, I was already tipsy by then. Stepping outside to feel the cool breeze, I finally felt a bit better. But I kept sensing a gaze fixed on me from behind. Actually, I noticed it as soon as I stepped out. When I turned around, I met those familiar eyes. Ethan was standing right behind me. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. After checking several times, I was sure it was really him. "What, it's only been a few days and you can't recognize me anymore? You really do forget the old for the new." His words were still as sharp and bitter as ever. Of course, only towards me. Clara, since leaving me, you've really been living it up. And here I was still worried about whether you had money to spend or a place to stay after you left. I didn't want to pay him any attention. I tried to walk past him and head back to the private room. But he grabbed my wrist firmly. Clara, we've been together for 10 years. And it's only been a few days since we split, and you're already treating me like this? Is it because of that guy named Sam? I shook him off and was about to leave, not wanting to waste another word on him. At that moment, my phone rang. It was my boss Sam calling, asking why I had been out so long and hadn't returned yet. I answered the call and told him I would be back soon. After hanging up, I saw Ethan staring at me with a look of joy. Clara, I knew you still have feelings for me. How could you not love me anymore? That Sam must be someone you used to make me jealous, right? Don't worry, I'll never let those annoying women appear in front of you again. I won't even acknowledge them. He stepped forward and grabbed my hand. Clara, let's go home right now. I told my family the wedding is postponed. Once you get back, we'll get married, okay? Ethan looked at me expectantly. I didn't know what gave him the wrong idea, making him think I was playing hard to get, wanting a promise from him before going back to marry him. I had no choice but to emphasize once again that we were already separated. Ethan, it's completely over between us. Please stop bothering me, or I'll call the police. But he didn't believe me, shaking my hand, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. Clara, I really know I was wrong. Please don't make a scene anymore, okay? Saying that, he tried to hold me, but I quickly dodged, though he still gripped my wrist tightly. Ethan, let go. My wrist hurt from his grip, and in anger, I raised my other hand and slapped him. Ethan, let go. We can never go back to the way things were. I don't love you anymore. But he forcefully pulled me into his arms. Clara, I know this time I really hurt you. I swear I will never do this again. Please don't say you don't love me anymore, it really breaks my heart. Clara, I'm sorry. Since you left, I realized how miserable I am. No one cooks for me, no one helps me pick out clothes, no one asks if I'm cold or hot. After losing you, I realized it feels like a piece of my heart has been gouged out. Clara, I know you still love me. You still keep the phone pendant I gave you before, which means you have me in your heart. Don't deny it anymore. Let's go home. If you want to work, come to my company. If you want to continue being a lawyer, I'll open a company for you. Ethan ignored my struggles and screams, grabbing my shoulders and trying to force me into the car. Fortunately, Sam appeared just in time. Ethan thought Sam was my man and threw a punch without a word. The restaurant security guards were very familiar with Sam and came over to help, finally holding down the furious Ethan. Sam called the police and then took me into the restaurant. The security guards held Ethan tightly, and I heard him shout behind me, Clara, you will regret this. The next day, I heard that Ethan was taken away by someone that very day. Sam told me not to worry. With this police report, Ethan wouldn't dare forcibly take me away again. After being together for 10 years, I never realized Ethan had such a crazy side. Maybe I was too compliant before, so he never showed this side. Ethan indeed didn't come to bother me anymore. I returned to work and threw myself wholeheartedly into my job. But a month later, my dad suddenly fell ill. They said it was serious and asked me to come back immediately. I didn't have time to think much, so I quickly booked the nearest flight back to my hometown and rushed to the hospital as soon as I arrived. But my dad called to say he wasn't at the hospital, he was at home. As soon as I entered the house, I saw my dad leisurely lying on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, not looking sick at all. The tension I had been holding finally eased, but I was so angry that tears fell from my eyes. Dad, do you know how worried I was? How could you scare me like this? My dad put on a stern face and said, if I didn't say that, would you have come back? Last time, I just said a few words to you, and you grabbed your suitcase and left. If I had asked you to come back, you definitely wouldn't have. I had to trick you into coming back this way. After he said that, I was even angrier. Dad, do you know how busy I am with work right now? Making me come back and forth like this wastes so much time. You don't have anything important to do, so why go to all this trouble to trick me into coming back? My dad darkened his face and slammed the coffee table heavily. What's so important about that lousy job of yours? The most important thing for a woman in her life is to get married. Ethan is such a good match for marriage, how can you just say you won't marry him? Of course I tricked you into coming back because there is something important, something even more important than my own life, and that is to have you and Ethan get married. I thought my dad was being unreasonable and couldn't help but shout at him. Dad. Ethan and I are completely over, there's no way I'm going to marry him. This matter is not up to you, my dad said with a triumphant smile. I followed my dad's gaze and turned around, seeing Ethan. In an instant, I understood everything. I looked at Ethan coldly, kept my distance, and raised my phone. Ethan, if you dare to act like last time again, I won't hesitate to call the police again. I had just pressed a key when my phone was suddenly snatched from behind. My dad turned off my phone, then smiled and said to Ethan, son-in-law, rest assured and stay here. I will lock these 2 doors tightly, no one can get in, and no one can get out. I will bring you meals 3 times a day on time. You both need to work hard so I can hold my grandchild soon. This also fulfills a dream of mine and Clara's mother. After saying that, my dad was about to close the door and lock it. I anxiously rushed to the door and shouted at him. But he just whistled and walked away. Looking back at Ethan, my eyes were full of hatred. Did you come up with all this? You even used my dad? Ethan chuckled, Clara, it was your dad who came to me first and personally came up with the idea. I couldn't possibly go against his wishes. I covered my face with both hands and let out a bitter laugh. After a moment, I looked up and told Ethan that I would never marry him, even if it meant death. He lowered his head and pondered for a long time before slowly raising it. Is it because of someone else? Is that why you don't want to come back to me? I smiled and shook my head. Ethan, my leaving you has nothing to do with anyone else, it's just that I no longer love you. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. It's good that it has nothing to do with others. Clara, it's okay if you don't love me, my love for you is enough. I believe you will fall in love with me again in the future. For now, the urgent matter is for us to have a child as soon as possible. Ethan's eyes were blood red. When he walked towards me, I was ready for a fight to the death. I retreated to the wooden cabinet by the wall and reached out to grab a pair of scissors used for tailoring. These were used by my mother for sewing when she was alive. I was glad they were still in their original place. I held the scissors tightly with both hands, pointing them at Ethan. Clara, I don't believe you would hurt me. Ethan lunged at me. I thrust sharply, but missed. Ethan grabbed the tip of the scissors, staring at me in shock. You actually dared to hurt me? Clara, you. His words were drowned out by the noise, first by the furious banging on the door, then by the sound of sirens. Fortunately, I had secretly called the police while Ethan wasn't paying attention. When I left with the police, my dad cautiously asked if I would come back. I shook my head. Apart from visiting my mother's grave, I will never return to my hometown again. I will fulfill my duty of supporting my parents, but as for family affection, forget it. Ethan was eventually punished and came to understand that I no longer loved him. Of course, he never ended up marrying Vivian either. A person like him would never truly love any woman, let alone sincerely marry one. The only one he loves is himself. What he enjoys is the vanity brought by women fawning over him, protecting him, and revolving around him. As for me, with the sky high and the sea wide, I will roam freely from now on. I will work hard and be very happy.